All right, good afternoon. The Secretary General was in MOPTI today in central Mali, where he visited the G5 Sahel camp and met with religious and community leaders. The Secretary General stressed the great suffering that the people of Mali have been through over the past few years. He said that peace in Mali was in the interest of not only the Malian people, but of the region and the world as a whole. The Secretary General stressed the threat of an expansion of the instability to other African countries in Africa as well as to Europe. He therefore called for an intensified assistance and support to Mali at the global level. The Secretary General is now on his way back to Bamako, where he's expected to meet with opposition representatives before participating in an iftar dinner with the parties to the Mali peace agreement. He will give... Sorry? Yes, but let me, you can ask your questions after I'm done, but thank you, he is. He will give a press conference in Bamako to wrap up his visit before heading back to New York, where he's expected tomorrow. And tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m., the Secretary General will address the General Assembly in plenary as member states formally adopt his reform plan for the UN development system. And at 5 p.m., the President, General Assembly, and the Secretary General will be at the stakeout outside of the Trusteeship Council. They will make a few remarks on the development reform, and they will then take some questions. Accordingly, since our boss will be speaking, we will not have a noon briefing tomorrow. As for those of you who asked about the Secretary General's next press conference, that's you, Mr. Abadi, and others, he will be holding one on the 26th of June in this very room. Back here, Jan Kubish, the Secretary General's Special Representative for Iraq, briefed the Security Council this morning on the recent Iraqi elections, and he said that the decision by more than half of the voting population not to exercise their democratic rights sends a strong signal to the elites ruling the country since 2003. He urged the Iraqi political elites to draw the necessary conclusions on the need for improved representation and justice for all, democratic accountability and good governance, void of corruption, sectarian quota system, nepotism, and patronage. He also urged the independent electoral management bodies to adjudicate all appeals properly, fully, and in time to enable corrections of the problems, justice, and the timely certification of the final election results. And the Undersecretary General Vladimir Voronkov briefed this council on his recent travels to Iraq, saying that the military setback of Daesh clearly demonstrates the long-term resolve of the Iraqi authorities in their fight against terrorism. He noted that the Iraqis had met with stressed that national reconciliation and reconstruction owned and driven by Iraqi people are essential to prevent the resurgence of violent extremism and terrorism in Iraq. And Michelle Konix, the Executive Director of the Counterterrorism Executive Directorate, also briefed on her recent travels to Iraq. And this afternoon, Nikolai Mladenov, the Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, will brief the Security Council at an open meeting on the recent developments in the Middle East. You will recall that yesterday, Mr. Mladenov issued a statement in which he said all parties must exercise restraint to avoid escalation and prevent incidents that jeopardizes the lives of Palestinians and Israelis. And this afternoon at 2:45, just before that 3 p.m. meeting, Ambassador Danny Danon, Permanent Representative of Israel, will brief you at the Security Council stakeout. Turning to Syria, today the Syrian Arab Red Crescent is delivering UN humanitarian assistance to Talbise in northern rural homes and Tul El Homor in southern Hama. This is the first convoy to hit northern rural homes since a convoy last reached Dar Kabira and surrounding areas on March 4th. The convoy is delivering assistance to more than 92,000 people in 2 locations. The convoy is also delivering food assistance for 12,000 others in nearby Al Jabra village. UN personnel were not permitted to participate in the convoy due to security approval not being received from the authorities. The UN continues to call on all parties to facilitate safe, sustained, and unhindered access to all those in need in Syria, including the 2 million people in hard-to-reach areas, in line with their obligations under international humanitarian and human rights law. And an update on the response to the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Our peacekeeping colleagues tell us that the UN mission in the country is providing an air bridge with the deployment of an aircraft transporting personnel between Kinshasa and Mbandaka, and another one conducting cargo and passenger flights between Mbandaka to Ibiko, Itipo, and Bikoro. Other aircrafts are doing cargo delivery from Goma and Kinshasa to Mbandaka. So far, the mission's aircraft have conducted 23 flights in support of the Ebola response. The mission is also helping to operationalize the Emergency Operations Center in Mbandaka and has set up a camp for 20 doctors in Iboko. It has improved internet connectivity in key locations, enabling partners to share critical data. Meanwhile, the UN's radio copy is using its networks to disseminate messages and the last updated information in local languages. Also in the DRC, our colleagues at the World Food Program tell us that a Cessna Caravan airplane operated by the WFP-run UN Humanitarian Air Service was involved in an accident today on takeoff from a remote airstrip in Kamonia in the Kasai region. 2 crew members and 3 passengers sustained minor injuries and were taken to local medical facilities. A helicopter from the UN peacekeeping mission was mobilized to evacuate them from Kamonia to Kananga, where another plane was able to transfer them to Kinshasa for further treatment. The cause of the crash is under investigation. And I've been asked about the violence in the Anglophone region in Cameroon in recent days. And I can say that we are aware of the clashes between the Cameroonian armed forces and unidentified armed men in the town of Menka in the northwest region of Cameroon on the 24th of May. We express our condolences to the families of the victims. The UN country team is in contact with the authorities to clarify the circumstances of the incident. We call for an end to the acts of violence in the Anglophone regions of the country and urge all Cameroonians to work together on an open and inclusive dialogue to address concerns of the population faced in those regions. We also call on the government to use restraint in the use of force and follow due process for those who are arrested. In this regard, we're aware of the sentencing on 2 days ago of 7 Anglophone activists for up to 15 years by a military court in Yaoundé for rebellion and acts of terrorism. And yesterday, in the Security Council, you will have seen that Rosemary DiCarlo, the Undersecretary General for Political Affairs, and Ursula Mueller, the Assistant Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Deputy Emergency Coordinator, briefed Council members in an open meeting on the situation in Ukraine. Late last night, we also issued a statement in which the Secretary General condemned the attack that took place, that killed 2 police officers and a civilian in Liège, in Belgium. And we also issued a statement yesterday afternoon following the meeting in Paris on Libya. All those were shared with you. And our colleagues at UNHCR have today urged Hungary to withdraw draft laws that would significantly restrict the ability of NGOs and regular citizens from supporting asylum seekers and refugees. And today we say thank you to our friends in Tashkent, as Uzbekistan has paid its regular budget dues in full, bringing us up to the nice number of 101. And lastly, tomorrow at 10:30 in this room, there'll be a briefing by Chantal Lan Carpentier, Chief of UNCTAD's New York office, on the 2018 Economic Development in Africa report entitled Migration and Structural Transformation in Africa. Halas, Mr. Abadi.
Thank you, Stéphane. The parties to the Paris meeting on Libya issued this declaration you mentioned, and they decided to hold an inclusive conference subsequent to the meeting for the implementation of the declaration. Does inclusive mean that the 4 parties will be in that conference, or there be other parties, and was the venue of the conference discussed?
I don't have any more information than the statement we issued yesterday. Obviously, I think, as always, we would like to see meetings to be as inclusive as possible. Yes, sir.
Sure, thanks a lot. Some other things, but I wanted to ask you about what you just read out on Cameroon. It seems like the statement says that these sentences, these 15-year sentences to Mancho, Bibixi, and others were 2 days ago, but that was actually 6 days ago. So I'm just wondering, was this statement in preparation sometime? Is it a typo in the statement? And in terms of who's actually communicating with the government, given that there's footage of bodies being put into a mass grave, Is Mr. Francois Fall involved? Is it the resident coordinator?
As I said, it's the country team is in contact with authorities.
And is the UN going to make public what the response to the government to footage of them pushing bodies into a hole is?
We will share updates as we're able to.
So is
share
Mr.
them.
Fall no longer involved in this file?
Mr. Fall, obviously, as a regional representative, is involved, but the country team is the country team, and they are the primary point of contact. But it doesn't diminish at all Mr. Fall's role. Eric.
Thank you. A question about what's happening. A question about this afternoon. Mm-hmm. Does the Secretary General support the U.S. call for the emergency meeting that condemns Hamas and the other militant groups?
You know, it's not for the Secretary General to support or not support any request for meeting by the Security Council. The special coordinator will brief representing the UN's views and the Secretary General's views. I think it's been clear that we have condemned the launching of rockets by Hamas or any other militants into Israel, as we've seen recently. We've also called on Israeli authorities for all parties to show restraint, including on the Israeli authorities, and to ensure that civilians are not targeted.
Do you think the Secretary General will have any further statements?
Well, we may have something later to say this afternoon, but Mr. Mladenov will brief and be representing, as his representative in the region, he represents the Secretary General's views. You may.
Are there any plans for the Secretary General to meet with the North Korean diplomat who is visiting the U.S.? Is he involved in that at all?
No, I'm not aware of any plans. Abdelhamid.
Thank you. Yesterday, Mr. Mladenov was quick to issue a statement condemning the firing of rockets into Israel. But he wasn't quick also to observe and see that 3 Palestinians were killed the day before, which inspired probably this barrage of rockets into Israel. Why he only sees one side of the story and not the other?
I think if you take a look back at everything that Mr. Mladenov has said in the past, you will see that he, as the Secretary General, continuously appeal for peace, continuously condemn the ongoing deaths of civilians, and that we need to see calm, and we need to see a restart to the peace process.
But the killing is on one side. 118 Palestinians already killed since June 30th. No Israelis were killed.
I think Mr.
Make a message? Doesn't that give him?
I think Mr. Mladenov's repeated briefings to the Security Council have been very clear and clearly represent.
Occupied people, do they should throw just flowers on their occupiers?
The point is that we need to see restraint. We need to see an improved situation for the Palestinians in Gaza. That involves Israel. That involves Egypt, and that involves the Palestinian leadership themselves. Nizar.
Yeah, today in Saudi Arabia, they sentenced the writer Muhammad al-Hadif for 5 years just for a tweet. Mm-hmm. Do you have any statement about human rights in Saudi Arabia?
I have not seen that particular report, but I know our human rights colleagues have issued statement expressing concern at some of the recent waves of detentions that we have seen in Saudi Arabia. Matthew.
Sure. I want to ask about the UN and child sexual abuse, past and present. I'm sure you've seen the report in The Independent and maybe elsewhere about the UNHCR report that and OIOS, in fact, which had the names, apparently, of NGOs whose staff members were involved in child sexual abuse but chose not to make them public, allegedly to defend or protect child witnesses. Is that something that Antonio Guterres, as a longtime head of UNHCR, supports? Does he believe that the OIOS report should, even at this late stage, be released? What's the purpose of withholding the names?
The case that's referred to occurred under the leadership of the High Commissioner before him, right?
Sure.
So I think any questions you should have addressed to UNHCR. But from my understanding that the report was not published, a summary of the draft assessment report was published as a note for partners and made available. It can be found both on UNHCR and Save the Children's website. I think if we have looked at the progression of how the UN deals with this issue since then and since the Secretary General has taken office, I think we have seen great progress in terms of transparency, in terms of creating a climate where people can move forward. Obviously, we're not where we want to be yet, but I think great progress has been made.
Michael, I just have one, because you'd said, and it's true, it's a 2002 report, but I'm assuming that it was known to him during his 10-year tenure there. And so, although the report is available, it doesn't name the groups. That seems to be the key issue.
I mean,
does he believe it should now be released?
As I said, this is an issue for UNHCR to deal with, and I've given you a part of the answer. Yes, sir.
Ms. Michel Connick visited Iraq.
Sorry, you pressed the mic. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Ms. Michel Connick from Counterterrorism Committee visited Iraq and spoke to officials there, and she has been addressed on the dismantle of ISIS and the terrorist groups over there. Any idea how the Iraqi government is handling thousands of detainees of ISIS or Daesh members in Iraq? Will they prosecute them in Iraq, or will they try to send them to their native land? How the Iraqi government is going to handle thousands of terrorists who have been arrested there?
I think she addressed the council, so I don't have much more to say what she addressed. Obviously, the issue of the justice system in Iraq is one that we have raised concerns with in the past, and that the UN mission has been following. We're also there to support the Iraqi authorities to ensure that there is a justice system that is fair and equitable, where people's rights are respected. Nizar.
Yeah, regarding Yemen, this recent attack on the neighborhood of Hodeidah has resulted in a lot of civilian casualties. Do you have any update on the aid and on the situation there?
We had an update yesterday. We're obviously concerned, I would say increasingly concerned, by the reports of fighting around Hodeidah and the increased humanitarian needs that would create. Eric.
Thanks. A question, if I can get back to North Korea just for a moment.
Yeah.
Is the Secretary General hopeful that a meeting between the North Korean delegation and the U.S. can lead to easing of tensions?
You know, we've been watching the developments around the summit very closely, the back and forth. The Secretary General has been very clear that he's very supportive of the summit, of the meeting between that we hope will happen between President Trump and Kim Jong-un. We will do whatever we can to help that process along. But I think we've seen, looking back over the last few days, as I said yesterday, I think we all need nerves of steel in hoping that this summit happens and happens in the right circumstances. Mr. Abadi.
On that same subject, has the Secretary General spoken to any other signatory of the Armistice Treaty of '53, or have they spoken to him about the issue?
I'm not aware of any contact at the Secretary General's level. Yes, Abdelhamid.
Thank you. You know, a peace vessel left Gaza shore yesterday, and it was intercepted by Israeli Navy. It was carrying 17 sick people. They were, they want to break the siege on Gaza. Did anybody take note of that?
I've seen those reports. I don't have anything to share with you on that at this point. Yes, sure.
I want to ask about Mali, DRC, and Portugal. But on Mali, this was the second sexual abuse case I wanted to ask you about. It's current. It was just released, I guess, last week by the UN that a UN contractor in Mali is alleged to have engaged in child rape. And so I wanted to know, particularly since the Secretary General was just there, it was unclear to me last week from Farhan's answer whether this individual can be and will be prosecuted by the Malian authorities. And I guess my question would be, is this a case in which the UN would waive immunity that may or may not apply to the contractor, or if none applies, has the person been apprehended?
The investigation, I think, is ongoing from what I have. and they're being investigated by OIOS. As a matter of principle, the Secretary General has always said he would waive immunity in cases of sexual abuse.
Did he look into this case while during the 2 days that he's been there?
I don't have any update.
Okay, and I wanted to ask you on the DRC, in Kinshasa, they've gone up posters essentially depicting Joseph Kabila as a candidate, seemingly contrary to various agreements, the Constitution. Is the country team there, have they seen these posters, and what do they make of them in terms of the
I think everybody has seen the posters. I don't have any analysis at this point. And your last question?
Okay, great. Yesterday you'd said that the you know, for whatever reason, maybe inadvertently non-disclosed stopover in Portugal by the Secretary General, like it wasn't in his.
Yeah, I understand.
Okay,
yeah.
so my question was, you'd said it was an official thing, and just in reading the reports in Lisbon about it, it seems it was kind of like basically like he briefed this Council of State.
Right.
So, and you said that's official UN business. So I wanted to just to understand it better. Is this something he does with any other country, i.e. briefing, or said otherwise, can his statement that he made in the meeting be made public?
Sure. You know, he went to Washington and he briefed the Foreign Relations Committee. He goes to different countries and he meets with people, the legislators and the executive. And so it's nothing. I think it's nothing. It's nothing abnormal.
The difference, it seems to me, is like when he met in D.C., it was called a meeting, and there were some readouts on each side. This was described as, the way it's described in the
if I have any more
observatories,
information,
that they
if I have any more
jointly
information,
analyze the world situation.
I will, if I have any more information, I will share it with you. Yes.
Yeah, given the amassment of troops near Daraa and the potential of a major battle happens there for liberation of the area, what effort is the United Nations doing to prevent a bloodshed?
So which area, sorry?
Governorate of Daraa in south east Syria. There are negotiations between Jordanians, Americans, Russians, etc. What is the role of United Nations at this stage? And
I think the role of the UN continues to be the same, is that we're in touch with as many parties as possible and encourage a returning to a political solution. Thank you.
One more question?
No, thank you.
In advance of tomorrow?